Good morning. Hi. Ah. Marilyn, are you staying for writing?
Baird. Hello, everybody. So, this is Rabbi Shulgin Fry's last presentation, and Rabbi Alexander starts next week. So, we need to thank him, maybe when he comes in. Is that what you're going to do? Okay, thank you. But I won't be. Thank you. She'll have to bring the TV monitor in here if there is one. Because how are they going to see? Yeah, I know. So I'll talk with her about that. Okay. Hey, good morning. You're wearing a coat. You usually don't wear a coat.
Yeah, it's a little chilly this morning. When I went to the gym at 6, it was 37.
You went to the gym at 6?
Yeah, I get up at 4:35.
Guess what?
Every day.
Hey, not
Every
because,
day.
not because you're a rabbi, but because you told me you got up at 6 to go to the gym. Huh?
I get up very early. I go to sleep very early. That's just the schedule that works best for me.
So what time do you go to sleep?
I go to lights out at 9. The dog and I are in bed watching Law and Order about 7 to 8. A couple of episodes of Law and Order. Lights out at 9 every night.
You know, we could get along as roommates because I go to bed about 2. No, sincerely, you ask her, and I get up about 8:30 or 9. But I get up earlier for you.
So, Rabbi.
Excellent.
I retired and I said, I'm changing my life.
So you know all about the Jews in Brazil, right? Oh, you mean right now? Oh. Could I bring you some coffee?
Used to go to bed about 10:30.
Okay.
So Linda there we are. Good.
All right, just one announcement. Someone in streaming didn't hear me before, but this is the end of semester 1. So Rabbi Schuldenfrei will complete his presentations for the semester today. And next week we'll have Rabbi Alexander. And Rabbi Goodman will continue. Wow. Okay.
We're only on letter C.
We're on to see. Actually, we'll probably continue next year.
We got.
We have a lot of material.
Yeah, there's a lot of material. Exactly. We're only on letter C, and today's the last day of the first semester. Okay. Well, first of all, let me thank those of you who are watching online who attended our show last weekend. Thank you very much for your support. You have absolutely no idea how big a difference it makes to us as performers to have a big responsive audience compared to a tiny little audience. And you folks were just great, great, great. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about Canada today. And since we have a Canadian with us, we are blessed to have Linda here this week. So maybe you could come up and talk to us for a few minutes about what it's like, the Jewish community where.
I made a map of Canada, and I
Oh, good. I was going to write one on the boards.
I
Better, much better than my, than my renderings. No, we have two. So Linda's giving out a map of Canada right now to everybody here, which is far better than my scribbling of maps.
Linda, do you want me to help you with those? Sure.
Yes, please.
You can use this one, Linda.
I'll take one.
Everybody get a handout?
That's fine. Just so I can refer to
Well,
it.
people in streaming, I don't have, unless it was sent.
Hello, everyone. My name is Linda Slotin. I'm visiting relatives here in lovely LA. And thank you for welcoming me here. I feel really blessed to be welcomed so nicely by you people. And again, thank you to Susie for for letting me know about this and showing me the way. Anyway, I have this map of Canada because the breadth and depth of Canada, from ocean to ocean to ocean to ocean, the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic, and it's a vast geographical area. However, most of the cities are at the 49th parallel. And what's the 49th parallel? The longest undefended border in the world, Canada and the United States. And just as you had immigration to the States of Jews coming in, so did we. And my parents, they were born here. My mother just made it because, was born in Canada, because her mother, who was of course steerage from Russia, was pregnant at the time. And where do Canadians land? In Halifax. And if you look at the east of this map, you will see Halifax. It's the capital of Nova Scotia and is in fact the largest city in the Maritimes, right in that area. And there's something called Pier 21, and it's something I have to do because of course they have a museum, and you can look up the ships that arrived in Canada, and you can find out obviously a lot of information about your parents. I haven't done that. I should. So my mother was from Russia, and my father's family was from Lithuania. And so they landed in Halifax. Of course, a few stayed, but it's much smaller communities in the Maritimes. By the way, our total population in Canada is about 38 million, about the same as your one state of California. So our population is not big, but our country is vast. Anyway, so they landed there. My my grandfather, I guess, couldn't speak English very much at all, and his name was Morris Yakubovich, or let's say Morris Jacob. It all got mixed up, and he became Jacob Jacob Morris. So, so that my maiden name is Morris, and we were known as Morris. And so people fanned out west. So the biggest community is Montreal, and you'll see from Halifax to Montreal. And was and is a vibrant Jewish community. It has a feel all of its own. I just know that from all the people who have left Montreal and live in Ottawa. But there's a special place in their heart for Montreal, and there was a reason they left Montreal in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I don't know if you know about the French Quebec politics. They still do. There's a big separation feeling among the French, Français, the French Quebec. So they came to Ottawa. Look at Ottawa, it's so close. But my family didn't go to Ottawa. They traveled all the way to Winnipeg, all right? And if you notice, Winnipeg is just about the center of the country. And actually, Winnipeg was touted to be a major, major center. You know, the rail lines would come through because it was centrally located. But a little city like Chicago took over, and that became the major thoroughfare for lots of things. Anyway, so my parents settled in Winnipeg, and they settled in what is typically called the north end of Winnipeg. That was, I don't know, the shtetl of Winnipeg where everyone landed. And I can't express enough the feeling of Yiddishkeit and belonging to a community. And it was, I don't know if it was expressed by them, but somehow every one of us, my siblings and I, we knew that in our kishkas that being Jewish was so important to us. It was in our DNA. It was, and my father wished he liked to think of himself as Orthodox. He tried to start an Orthodox synagogue, and he did. He was part of it. And you lived in a community where you all lived together. You know, my street, the whole street, all the people were Jewish. I remember there's one lady, Mrs. McDonald. We couldn't figure out what this one, but she was on that street. And of course, they all grew up together. But that was, and that was, by the time I was born in 49, now you know how old I am, we lived in a single family home. Remember when my parents immigrated, they lived on top of stores and whatnot, and my grandmother on my father's side, her husband died early, and so she was a caterer, and my grandfather, he was just a peddler. He went out in the country, got some goods, and brought it back. And apparently my grandmother, I never met, never spoke English. She only spoke Yiddish, and she lived with us, apparently. I wasn't born yet. And my brother knew Yiddish at the time. So it was that kind of feeling. The Ukrainians lived in the community not far from us. And, you know, it was the 30s. And, you know, well, my father had to leave school. My mother couldn't go to university and could not get a job in what she was trained in. I remember she used to say it was Burroughs' bookkeeping machine. So she would, you know, but she couldn't. So she worked in a garment factory. And it did have a little bit of a schmata business. The main one was in Montreal, but there was a schmata business in Canada, in Winnipeg. And it's a thriving Jewish community amongst it's kind of isolated. If you look there, it's not much. The United States, the North Dakota is just south of it. People, I remember when I was in university, some people would say they would go right past the university and go for breakfast in Grand Forks, North Dakota, you know. And if people were really doing, having a good trip, if they wanted to go in, it's very isolated. They would go to Minneapolis in Minnesota. They would drive further because, you know, for all the shopping, all the women had to do their shopping. But Winnipeg being, it is quite isolated. It's very cold. They say you have winter in the, and then mosquito season. That's the summer. It's, but it was culturally diverse with with the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, the Manitoba Theatre Centre, outdoor theatre in the summer. There was always lots to do. And I personally, I was 5 in January. My birthday's in January, January 5th, 5 days. I missed the deadline for going to kindergarten because the deadline was you had to be 5 by December 31st. So my mom and dad sent me to the Talmud Torah. I remember when I lived in Philadelphia and I went to look for a job in a Hebrew school, and I said I went there, and Rabbi Kravitz was the rabbi there. He knew him. To me, he was an old man with a beard. But anyway, I was there, and I am so happy I went. And to this day, I mean, I was too young, but I wish I could have said, when we moved to Calgary in my real formative years, I wish I could have had the foresight. I was too young to say, don't stop Hebrew school. I wish I would be fluent in Hebrew. But we left, and my father was looking for further opportunities, and we went to Calgary. Calgary's in Alberta. You probably know Calgary. There was an Olympics there. And that's the oil industry of Canada. And Calgary is different than Winnipeg. Calgary, the population, the Jewish population is so much smaller, and you lived in the southwest of the city. Most of the Jews lived there, and there were but it was not like your whole street. It was so different. It was different for my parents. It was different for us, and there's a difference, I think, between Polish Jews and Russian Jews. Do you think? I think there's I think my parents were a little stuck up, maybe, because they like their Russian Jewish friends in Winnipeg. And I don't know, but I don't think they ever. It was never like Winnipeg, and the Jewish population is small. It's small in Canada, although Toronto, after Los Angeles, probably has the largest Jewish population, and it is. I mean, you can't go down Bathurst Avenue in Toronto without feeling your Jewish identity there. And I think the Jews in Canada, just generally, we speak the same language, we look the same, but there is a difference between Canadians and Americans, politically, socially, lots of ways. And I think it's the same with the Jewish community. I think we're more conservative. I don't think we have as many Reform synagogues. And it's changing, of course, with intermarriage and the younger generation, the older generation, and new thoughts. And we followed what happens in the States eventually happens in Canada, actually. But we are different. We have our own sets of ideas, and as far as immigration goes, we're pretty open as far as Western democracies. I mean, the Ukrainians, the Vietnamese refugees have come to Canada, and of course all the Jews. However, when the St. Louis went to Cuba, as we talked about last week, and came out to the States, came to Canada too, and it was refused entry. And not too long ago, well, 20 years ago, there was a book finally written. It was called None is Too Many. It was written by Harold Troper and Irving Abella. Irving Abella's wife, Rosalie, was a Supreme Court judge, by the way. And here's something I just took about this. One of the most significant studies of Canadian history ever written, None is Too Many, conclusively lays to rest the comfortable notion that Canada has always been an accepting and welcoming society. Detailing the country's refusal to offer aid, let alone sanctuary, to Jews fleeing Nazi persecution between 1933 and 1948, it is an immensely bleak and discomforting story, and one that was largely unknown before the book's publication. So we have our history. It was there was a man in the Foreign Affairs Department who he ruled the roost, and the prime minister at the time was not too concerned. But the survivors of the St. Louis came to Canada a few years ago, as they did in the States in Washington, and they came to Parliament and they sat in the bleachers, in the visitors area, and the Prime Minister stood up, and as he always does when it comes to apologies, he did the most beautiful apology for Canada's behavior.
November 7th, 2018 is when Trudeau stood up and apologized.
Yes. And I was at, there was a program where they were at my synagogue, and I heard them say, and this is, I'm not faulting the Americans or anything, but it so happened that Hillary Clinton, I guess, was busy. You know, she was, what was her position? What do you call it here? Foreign Secretary of State. That would be Foreign Affairs here in Canada. And maybe she was busy, and there was an underling who came and did the apology, and they didn't feel it was heartfelt. However, I have to say, Trudeau, that's his strength. He's good at apologies. Anyway,
Wonderful.
I'm sorry, one other thing. One other thing is, when I was in Calgary, I got involved with Young Judea. It's a Jewish youth movement, and I've never looked back from that. That has been my standard of my concern about Israel, and it's in my DNA. And now I'm happy to say my grandchildren from New York come to Canada in the summer, and they go to their father's youth movement camp in Canada. So, and it's wonderful to be friends with the United States. Okay.
Oh. Hold on. Go ahead.
We were in Montreal about 20 years ago, and we went to a traditional conservative synagogue there on Friday night and Saturday morning, and we were told by the congregants that a large portion of the people who were Jewish in Montreal had left to go to Toronto because of the possibilities of separation, and they did not feel welcome in Montreal.
That's correct.
That's correct, and I'm sure the rabbi will talk more about it. Yeah, yeah. But now there's a heavy Moroccan faction of Sephardim in Montreal. I mean, they speak French, and so I don't know.
North African.
Yeah.
They came from, the Moroccan Jews came from Spain at 1492. They
Yeah.
migrated largely at that point. So they're
Yeah.
Sephardic.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Linda, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Janice, you had a question?
And don't forget all the Canadians who are in Los Angeles, actors, actresses, producers, and directors.
Yes. Hang on one sec. Janice has a question. Oh. Young Judea Camp. That would be Hadassah?
No. Has nothing to do with Hadassah. No.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much for doing that for us. Personal accounts are always so interesting. It's wonderful. Okay. So, Louis XIV, King of France, makes Canada officially a province in 1663. And at the time, he declares that only Roman Catholics are welcome in the province. So the story of Jews in Canada obviously starts sometime after that because they weren't welcome in the very beginning. The first presence of Jews comes in 1749, and there were several Jews who accompanied Governor Edward Cornwallis, and they established Halifax. In 1760, the British seize Montreal. So then we have the English, the British presence. 1760 as well, Samuel Jacobs is recorded as the first Jewish resident of Quebec. And what was his job? He was a supplier of the troops, the British troops. He ended up marrying a French-Canadian girl and brought the children up Roman Catholic. But officially, he was the first Jew of Quebec. And the early Jews, the first Jews who came to Canada, were mostly involved in fur trading, or they served in the British Army. A few were merchants, a few owned land, but primarily fur trading and the army. At that time, Montreal had a Jewish community of about 200. In 1768, we have the first synagogue. It's called the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue of Montreal, Sha'arit Israel, the Gates of Israel, and it's the oldest synagogue in Canada. Now, obviously, we know if it's a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, we know these were Sephardic Jews who founded this synagogue, right? And it was the only synagogue in all of Canada until about 1846. In 1832, a law was finally passed that granted full political rights to Jews. In 1850, there were approximately 450 Jews in Canada, and they lived mostly in Montreal. The big exodus to Toronto that Linda was talking about, we'll get to. But in the beginning, anyway, Montreal was very, very important. In 1853, we have the first Jewish cemetery. And by 1862, there are 100 Jews, a very small community, who settled in Victoria, British Columbia, which you'll see on the very far left down, right? And we have the second synagogue that opens. And by the say again? Yes. And by 1871, in the census that was taken in 1871, there were 1,115 Jews in all of Canada. 409 of them, 409, I love that. 409 were in Montreal, 157 were in Toronto, and 131 were in a place called Hamilton. Do you know where Hamilton is? Where's Hamilton? Toronto. Ah, I see. Okay, so just outside. So it's a suburb of Toronto, kind of? No, it's another city? Got it. Separate city that is close to Toronto, Hamilton, way down at the bottom right. I see. Great. Okay. As you might expect, from 1890, the late 1800s, early 1900s, we have a lot of Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe and Russia fleeing the pogroms. And just as a refresher, remember in 1881, Tsar Alexander II is assassinated. And it is blamed on Jews. There were no Jews who participated. There's one person who had a very tenuous connection to Jews, but it started all kinds of riots and pogroms. As you might expect, these Jews who came from Eastern Europe and Russia were very poor. And the population, the Jewish population of Canada grew to 155,000 very quickly. So there were lots of immigrants. And what's interesting, the immigrants brought their idea of a kehillah to Canada. Do we know what a kehillah is? A kehillah in Hebrew is a community. But but it's a little more specific than that. In the Middle Ages, in Europe, the Jews established kahilot, and what it meant was basically they were a self-autonomous community. In other words, the Beit Din could decide on all kinds of issues. It's never been the case where we are that our law could override civil law of the country that we're in, but in Jewish matters, we could govern ourselves. The Beit Din could decide who could marry whom, what food is kosher, you know, all kinds of questions, divorce, who, you know, and in the Orthodox community, as you know, who could marry whom is a big question. Not everybody can marry somebody just because they fall in love with them. You have to, if you're a mamzer, it's really hard. If you are a Kohen, I mean, you have very many restrictions on whom you can marry. Okay. And very interesting fact that when these very poor Jews from Eastern Europe and Russia came to Canada, there were already, obviously, a number of Jews in Canada, and many of them were doing quite well for themselves. And what they did was they helped the Jews who were poor. They helped them get jobs, they helped them navigate the Canadian system, how to live, everything else. This is, as you may remember, in stark contrast to the United States. The first wave of immigrants who came to the Jewish immigrants who came to the United States in the early to mid 1800s were from Germany. And they were educated and they had money. And they were not overly religious. The next huge wave, as you well know, that comes in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Eastern Europe or Russia, very poor, very uneducated. When they got here, the German population was embarrassed. They were mortified that these were people who were representing our religion. And it was a very big problem in New York, especially at the time, the Eastern European Jews and the German Jews. There was a lot of animosity there. Contrasted to Canada, where the wealthy Jewish population helped the immigrants to get settled. Good question. What was the reason for the difference? And say again? The German Jews in the United States, absolutely correct, Janice, were absolutely embarrassed. Yes. So why did the Canadian Jews help? They weren't German Jews, that's for sure. And, you know, the Germanic sensibility had something to do with that, absolutely. So Abraham de Sola, in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, establishes the Hebrew Philanthropic Society in order to help these immigrants. And it helped them with all kinds of areas: housing, food, medical, everything. At the same time, there was an expansion of Jews into the rural provinces of Canada. Why? Spurred on by gold, the discovery of gold. And Jews wanted, of course, to be involved in that as well. And so there was an expansion into the provinces. They established a few farm colonies. And in these colonies, you know, aside from trying to find gold, they worked mostly as storekeepers and tradesmen for exactly the reason that Linda told us earlier, which is that the railway lines move through these communities. And so these merchants set up shops along the rail lines where they knew people would be coming. In 1914, we have the first Jewish mayor, and his name is George Simon. At the same time, we find Jewish communities in all the major cities of Canada by this time, by the early 1900s. 3/4 of all Jews at that time, of course, lived in Montreal and Toronto. The overwhelming majority of these Jews were Ashkenazim. I mean, the huge influx from Eastern Europe, and we've heard this play out many, many, many times everywhere. So we understand why this happened and how it happened. By 1919, the Canadian Jewish Congress is formed, the CJC, and its job was to lobby the government regarding issues of immigration, human rights, and anti-Semitism. So speaking of anti-Semitism, in 1933, August 16th, 1933, we have the first real act of anti-Semitism. It's called the Christie Pitts Riot, and it was after a baseball game on that day that a group of Nazis started to riot. The next year, in 1934, there was a medical strike at Montreal's Notre Dame Hospital because Notre Dame Hospital had hired a Jewish doctor. And there was a medical strike, and ultimately the doctor resigned because he realized he wasn't going to have any patients. No one was going to go to him. During World War II, there were 17,000 Canadian Jews who served in the Canadian Armed Forces. By 1939, as we had just said and Linda talked to us about, Canada had turned away the St. Louis, for which Trudeau apologized. In the 1940s, the restrictive covenants law came into play. Restrictive covenants meaning landlords can't rent to Jews. And that was a thing. Landlords could not rent. I'm sorry? We had the same thing here, absolutely. Same thing here as well as colleges and, quotas and the whole thing. In 1948, the restrictive covenants rule is overruled. It's overturned by the Ontario Supreme Court. Wait a minute, sorry. Let me go back. In 1945, we have the restrictive covenants law that was put into play. In 1948, it is overruled, I hope that's what I said, by the Ontario Supreme Court. So it was a provincial Supreme Court of the province of Ontario. In 1950, the Supreme Court of Canada overturns the Supreme Court of Ontario so that the rule is stricken. And landlords are not allowed to discriminate in renting out properties. In the 1940s, there are approximately 40,000 Holocaust survivors. And the universities in Canada tended to be more willing to accept Jews. And as you just pointed out, we had the same thing here. It was a little bit later than that, but same thing here. My father always wanted to be a medical doctor. That was his passion in life. and he did very well in school. He applied, but the medical schools all denied him because they already had their quota of Jews. So he went to NYU and became a businessman because that's all he could do. They wouldn't accept him to medical school, and it was a great sorrow in his life because he always wanted to be a medical doctor. In 1961, South Africa becomes a republic. Why is that important? Because there is civil unrest and rioting against the new policies. So a number of South African Jews left, and they went to Canada. And as I think Linda pointed out late in the presentation, Moroccan Jews. At the same time, there were a number of French-speaking Jews from North Africa who went to Montreal. And obviously, it was a good fit in Montreal. You know, we didn't say this specifically, but we should say this. We've been like talking around it. So Montreal and Quebec as a province are different from the other provinces of Canada. In the other provinces of Canada, people speak English. What do they speak in Quebec, and especially Montreal? They speak French Canadian. So in case people weren't sure about this, Montreal is different, and people speak French Canadian, and they don't want you speaking English. And that's why many people ended up leaving Montreal, because of the rules regarding, the language that you speak. In 1968, we have the first Jewish cabinet minister. In 1973, the first Jewish Chief Justice of the Canadian Supreme Court. Isn't that wonderful? So if we look at Canada today, the breakdown is approximately 26% of Jews in Canada affiliate with the conservative movement. Approximately 17% affiliate with the Orthodox movement. Approximately 16% affiliate with the Reform movement. Approximately 12% aren't sure. And an intermarriage in general, compared to other places, is not as big an issue as it is in many places. At the last census, there was 77% of Jews had a Jewish spouse. I'm sure that's changing. But in general, there for a lot of Canada's history, there has been less Jewish intermarriage. By far, as Linda told us, the largest Jewish populations are in Ontario and Quebec, right? In Toronto and Montreal, by far. But there are other congregations. There are smaller Jewish communities in British Columbia, Manitoba, Alberta, everywhere. And Toronto is absolutely the largest Jewish population center, for sure. There are, because someone asked a little bit earlier, there are about 30,000 Reform Jews in Canada. There are approximately 25 Reform congregations. And starting in 2022, especially, just a few years ago, there is movement within the conservative community, meaning that a number of conservative congregations have left the conservative movement. Mostly not completely, but mostly over reasons like the role of women in the synagogue, gay rights in the synagogue. And so many conservative congregations felt that the conservative movement in general no longer reflected what they believed, and so they left the conservative movement. My sense, a strong sense, which has been validated in a lot of the research that I did, is that in general, Canada's Jewish population is to the right of where we are. In other words, conservative Judaism in Canada, especially Montreal, but Canada in general, looks almost like orthodoxy. Not quite, but almost. And if we look at the conservative platform, what the conservative movement was designed originally to be, conservative Judaism looks a whole lot more like orthodoxy than it does Reform. Good. So Gary says, in his estimation, conservative Judaism in Canada looks really more like traditional Judaism. It is for sure on the right side of what the conservative movement believes. There are still conservative congregations who, in Canada, that separate seating still needs to be maintained. Montreal for sure. Janice says she went to a synagogue in Montreal that had separate seating, yes. So remember that the conservative movement is different from the Reform movement in the sense that the leader of the conservative synagogue is called a Mare D'Atra, in Aramaic, the master of the place, which means he or she, mostly he, can decide halakhic issues for the congregation. So it isn't a movement that says, okay, the minions are not required anymore. The leader of the synagogue, the rabbi, can say, in this synagogue, we have a mechitza. In this synagogue, women will not be called to the bima. And that is acceptable in conservative Judaism because he gets to make that decision. I got to make those decisions when my synagogue was conservative. And then I got annoyed with conservative and too many labels. You know, people walk in the door and it's like, are you Reform? Are you Jewish? Do you believe in the Jewish God? Good. You are welcome in my synagogue. I don't care whether you identify, I don't care whether you keep kosher or not. It's none of my business. Anyway, my synagogue is now independent. Independent means we don't affiliate with a certain movement. I get to basically run the services the way I want to. If you come to my Saturday morning, it will look very much like what you have here, except shorter. Because, you know, especially during COVID, people were on Zoom all the time. Nobody was going to sit for 3 hours on COVID. What do you have now? 9:30 to noon. I go 9:30 to about 11:15, 11:30 at the latest. So a little bit shorter. But I daven all the shachrit. I mean, it will look exactly like what you're used to here. Friday nights, very eclectic. Guitars. I mean, we just, lots of English. We just do all different kinds of things. So my sense is that Judaism in Canada is to the right on everything of where we are. Reform Judaism in Canada is traditional reform, meaning it's to the right of where we are here. Our liberal congregations here would be too liberal for Canadian Reform Jews. Our conservative congregations here would be too liberal in general for conservative Canadian Jews. And so that at least gives us a little sense of what's going on with our wonderful northern neighbors. Yes. Why was Winnipeg one of the central areas where Jews congregated? His mother's family settled in Winnipeg, moved to Chicago. Winnipeg was a central community, mostly Orthodox. Linda, can you speak to that at all? It was another large population center along the railway as well, and if you had relatives who lived there, you might go there. Plus, I think you mentioned Chicago's right underneath it, right? It's very close. And as we know, Chicago had a huge Jewish population. So I think that there was some overlap. Some Jews in Chicago may have wanted to go up to Winnipeg a little bit. Janice. From the Buffalo Jewish community, there was a lot of shopping in Toronto for kosher food. And Hamilton. So that, that may very well be a pretty big issue. You could only get possibly kosher food in the larger cities along the rail lines. Therefore, it was there that the Jewish communities were most established. Sure. Synagogues in Toronto are humongous. Okay, one more comment. I don't have the final number because I couldn't find a current number. However, what I can tell you is this: Canada has the third largest population of Jews in general in the world, behind Israel and the United States. So the Canadian Jewish population is enormous. That was the last that I read. What do you? Okay, Linda says she thinks France might have more than Canada. I'll try to get a little more information. Janice. Yeah. What Janice was saying is that when you go into a store in Montreal, you will have the instructions, you will have everything written in both English and French, all over Canada. Yeah. All right, everybody, have a beautiful week. Not sure, maybe we'll look at Chile and a couple of other places. In Santiago? Okay, you'll talk about that next week. Great. Have a wonderful week. Linda, thank you so much for your presentation today. I hope you have enjoyed your stay in Southern California, and thank you for being here. Thank you. Now I've got to drive to Riverside for a funeral. Yes.
I went to Quebec and Montreal, and they were really very friendly, even though we didn't speak French. But it was, everything was, French first.
Yep, for sure.
And I am a Buffalo Bills fan. And you know what? They caved in. They just
I just have a quick question.
so bad.
Do you know if Zachary has any Jewish?
I felt so bad. And I remember the Jim Kelly years. They never got that chance.
Did a DNA thing, and he is actually half.
Can I get you something after?
Are you sure? So I'm 99% sure what happened is mom had an affair with a Vietnamese man and had a child.
The South Side. Right.
Okay, I just wondered if you knew about her.
We did in Chile, like, there's a large Muslim population, the largest anywhere in South America.
I don't want to bump into you.
foot.
Yeah.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
Hanging in there.
How's the healing coming?
I wish my back felt better, but otherwise I'm back to my activities, so.
Good, good, good. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Hold on one second. Please call the rabbi soon Oh, it's a cool town.
Cool, yeah.
It has like the play of what happened. It's a
Oh, good. Oh, that one.
yeah.
I have to tell you, that game, Marv and I were stationed in Germany, and on Armed Forces television, they replayed it because it was on in the middle of the night where we were. So they replayed it in the afternoon. So I already knew
You're like, how's this
the
gonna
end.
happen?
And I'm watching it and I said, I don't believe they won. I don't believe it, I don't believe it. And then I saw it, I mean,
Right.
it was just so funny. Anyway, I apologize, I missed your class last night. My book club was having trouble rescheduling, and that was the night we did.
Right. It was a fun discussion last night. Really good.
I'm sure.
But the
but-
source sheet is in that pack.
Right, right. I will definitely look at that. But I wanted to double check with you because we looked at the Dot Ariel calendar trying to schedule our next book club to not conflict with your class. And it said the first 2 weeks of March, we are not having class. Is that correct? Because it was not on the calendar.
March.
Hi, Lana.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Oh, well, the first week of March it's Purim. So we're not having class on the
It's
7th.
Purim that night?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the weekend after that I'm at a yeshiva in New York. So no.
Okay.
So the first 2 weeks of March is correct.
Okay,
But the
good.
14th, you don't really want, I mean, unless you want to meet on Purim, the 14th
Right.
is.
Got it. Yeah, I think we mistakenly scheduled for the 7th, but we'll switch the committee to the 14th. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. Good afternoon.
And you bought a motorhome and you're gonna start traveling. I'm so thrilled.
ready for Turkey? Here we go.
Little did I know when I was taking Spanish in
How
college.
useful it is.
I guess he'll tell us.
You're leaving again when exactly what day?
A week from tomorrow. No, but I'm going to New York first. I'm going to spend the weekend in New York. I'm going to New York next Thursday. And I'll spend the weekend in New York, and then I'm back Sunday. On the 12th. The 23rd. So it's 10 days.
Okay, does everyone have a sheet?
Well, also, I mean, my flight is so late at night, but I didn't want to fly out on the same day and worry that the first flight might get delayed. So I have a niece in New York, so I should be
That's cool.
right when you went to Cleveland, yeah.
Okay. Good morning. It's nice to see everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. This is our last session together, so I just want to say that I've really enjoyed this time that we've had together, and I've enjoyed the study. I didn't bring it because I was running from another meeting, but we have gone over every single text in that Rubenstein book, the Jeffrey Rubenstein book, the Timeless Tales book. We've gone through every single chapter, the central text of that chapter. So that felt really good that we did that. And for next year, very beginning, there's 2 or 3 books that have been written on rabbinics that I'm thinking about maybe doing our class based on those. I think this worked pretty well, and it was kind of fun to study the text together. So this is the last class, and you would have thought I planned it, that we had exactly the right amount of. It just worked out that way. I was a little worried because I woke up this morning. I'm like, I think there's one more story in there, but let's see. And there was. So this is a story. I actually included more than just the story because I wanted to touch on a few announcements. First of which is, if you are here this Shabbat, just know that the clergy will not be here. It will be all lay-led, because the clergy, we're all going to Camp Ramah for our community-wide Shabbaton. Is anyone coming on the community-wide Shabbaton from this group? No? Okay. It is, there are over 215 people coming to the Shabbaton. So we have people in their 70s, I think a few in their 80s, and we also have preschoolers and everyone in between who are going on the Shabbaton. So it's going to be really an incredible experience at Camp Ramah, and so it promises to be a lot of fun. So we won't be here for Shabbat, but we'll be in Ojai. So if you're in Ojai, swing by the camp, and we can have lunch together. Come this Shabbat to hear the words of Torah of one Joette Labinger. I guarantee you that it will be well prepared, well researched, and from the heart. So can you send me a copy? I mean, you're like, when I write it, I can send you the... No, it's done? Oh, good.
Yeah, because I knew I wouldn't have time during the week.
So you are volunteered to be the darshanit, and then you're leaving for Morocco like the next day.
No, next week.
The next week. That's busy. That's good. I, it gives me a lot of joy when I see Joette and the reverence that you have, Joette, for your the collection of Judaica that you and your late husband have collected, and that when you show me his notes and texts, and I kind of imagine you sitting in your study in the beautiful office that you have and going through the books, and I think that's just really a bracha to his memory.
And I also enjoy lending it out. Last week, Mel borrowed Sarna from me to do his drash, and the part that he was looking for was in there. And when Marv used to study, he would underline things that were important to him, and the part that Mel was looking at was underlined by Marv. So it was kind of like
It's really nice. That's really great. Yeah. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Yeah. The United Synagogue. Yeah. And his dedication to this country and the armed services. So what a mensch. And so please come this Shabbat and hear Joette deliver what I'm sure will be a beautiful Devar Torah. And also, if you don't get a chance to email it to me, I can watch it. I mean, after, I'll watch it next week. Okay. And then also, if you would like to sign up to be a darshan or a darshanit, we would love you to. And what I would volunteer is that if you wanted to sign up, some of you have facility. You've all studied text now. But if you're not sure what you would say, like I would study with you beforehand. So sign up for like 2 months from now, and in a month, we'd go out for coffee, and we'd go into my office, and we'd study the text. We'd pull some books off of the shelf. We'd discuss some ideas, and then you give the drash. So I would volunteer, to sit with you. That would be really wonderful. And then lastly, last announcement. So come to Shabbat, hear Joette, sign to be a darshan and a darshanit, and then we could use your help. And I know that this may not be for everybody, but if you like cooking, we're having a veggie chili cook-off on Super Bowl Shabbat. So all it requires is you to take your chili, like make your vegetarian chili, put it in a crock pot, and you bring it to a .rel, and then we are going to have Super Bowl Shabbat, so it's a week from this coming Friday. And so it promises to be a really great time. I know it's a little bit more of a little kind of younger kid-oriented event, but I think it's really great when all of you come out to support that, and it promises to be a lot of fun. Sorry, we're trying to figure out a meeting here. So does anyone care who wins the Super Bowl? You do? Oh, okay. So Gary, so come to Super Bowl Shabbat then. Okay. Oh, that's right. You are from Missouri. So, okay. All right, good. Speaking about Missouri, let's go into the Jerusalem Talmud with Shimon ben Shetach. That's a segue. Okay. This is a sugya. I actually haven't brought this yet at all. This is the Jerusalem Talmud. And this is a text I'd actually not encountered before. The Jerusalem Talmud is the less well-known Talmud, right? Like we venerate and reference, and when you say Talmud, it's mostly Babylonian Talmud. So it's rare to spend time with the Jerusalem Talmud, mostly because Rabbinic Judaism really fortified a diaspora community. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about like the implications of that, why the Babylonian Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud, but suffice to say this is from the Jerusalem Talmud. Shimon ben Shetach, we've met him before. Does anyone remember who he was? He was a sage from like 100 and something BCE, and he was the guy whose whose sister was married to the king, and he got into a fight, and the king was Yanai, was a Pharisee, was a Sadducee, and so Shimon ben Shetach was like sort of a thorn in his side. But anyway, something I want to point out, so that's just one piece of knowledge. Then the other thing that I want to point out is that in rabbinic literature, they care about lost objects. So we talked about this last night, so this came up. So it's the same thing, right? So let's say that these little ear things, these ear phones that you, let's say I forget these. Now, Gary finds these. Gary, do you know how to, Gary sees these. Gary, can you return these to me? Right. And how would you know, why would you do that, Gary? It's a Jewish ethical thing to do, and it also has a label on it. Right? Like, it has a label on it. My kids go to middle school. We donate a sweatshirt a week to the Lost and Found. You know what we've done? They're going to kill me if they know this. I told the nanny, I'm like, I don't care. And they take they peel the labels fall out or whatever. I'm like, I don't care what you do. Go to the Lost and Found. Pick out three sweatshirts that are just not labeled and take those home. And that actually is ethical Jewishly, because there's a whole discussion of lost objects. Gary could easily return it because mine has what's called a siman on it, an identifying object. I put a name tag on my little earphones, so when I lose them, someone will return them to me, hopefully. If I don't have a siman, if I didn't put this label on, let's say it was blank, it would depend on like where it was placed, the time, how often Gary would have, like, did Gary ask us to make a community announcement? Like, all those things are factored in. It's all discussed in the Talmud about lost objects. So Shimon ben Shetach has to deal with lost objects. So that's one other point. And then the other point I want to say is that within rabbinic literature, like many other literatures, there's a fascination with Alexander the Great and him as like a folklore kind of figure in rabbinic Judaism, both for the good and for the bad. So there's a portrayal of Alexander the Great as heroic and virtuous, but also as problematic. And so this is a text about Alexander the Great, and he is, you okay? You okay? Oh, it's hard to hear? Oh, okay. Is that better? Okay. Let me know if I can position the microphone differently. Okay. So, anyway, there's a fascination with Alexander the Great. So, we learned Shimon ben Shetach returning lost objects, and Alexander the Great. So let's see what happens. Shimon ben Shetach was working with linen. His students said to him, Rabbi, in order to make it easier for you, we want to buy a donkey. Then you don't have to work so hard. Keep in mind that the sages of those days worked. So like when they talk about like this nonsense that's going on in Israel of like more government money to support people sitting on their tuchas all day, that is not the rabbinic ethic, but Shimon ben Shetach worked. So his students would say, hey, we want to make life easier for you. So you're going to buy a donkey. So that way when you have to transport the linen, it's easier. Great. They went and bought a donkey from a Saracen. Now, that's a non-Jew, like a race of people. I forgot where it's like was it like by Syria? But anyway, like they're non-Jewish. So they buy a donkey from a Saracen, from a non-Jewish guy. A pearl was hanging on the donkey's neck. Let's pause. Well, yeah, it's sort of like putting on like fancy hubcaps, right? Like Ernie's got blinged out hubcaps on his Toyota, right? On my Chevy, I've got, and then the car, Ernie and I are going to go where the car bounces up and down with big wheels, right? So everyone dresses up, right? So it's like a little, like, you have to decide whether on your car, does anyone get the stripe anymore? You used to be able to like buy, you remember? You used to be able, what was it called? Yeah, the stripe on the side of the car. Yeah, right. Right. They still offer that? I don't think so. Do they? Racing stripes. Okay, good. So anyway, you want to get some like chazarai to like put on your car. Okay, good. So we'll get there. We'll get there. So anyway, they buy a donkey. Now, think about this as if you bought a car and then you opened the trunk and there was a computer in the back, that maybe is analogous. So they buy a donkey for him, and it has it's a non-Jewish person, just like it's a nationality. Okay? Yeah, sure. So there's a pearl hanging on his back. So they open the donkey's trunk, and there's a MacBook or an iPad. Okay. They came to him saying, because of this, you don't have to work anymore. You just struck it rich. Like, there's a pearl. You've got it. You bought the donkey. You got the pearl. Retirement. He said to them, what are you talking about? Like, why? They told him, we bought from you a donkey from a Saracen, a non-Jew, and a pearl is hanging on his neck. He asked them, so this is Shimon ben Shetach, does its owner know about this? They answered, no. He told them, go and return it. But then they respond to him. So what he says, you buy your car from CarMax and you open the trunk and there's like, the computer's in the back. You got to go back to the dealer and say, hey, or if you buy it privately, right? I buy it from Gary, and Gary's got, his St. Louis Cardinal stamp usual jersey in the back, and signed. I've got to, like, I could sell it and retire from a .Ariel or return it to Gary. So Shimon ben Shetach, return it. Does anyone think he shouldn't have to return it? Okay, good. All right. They didn't counter, he says, return it. But they say to him, and this is an ugly part of rabbinic literature, but did not Rav Huna, Bevei Bar Gozlan, in the name of Rav say, so didn't Rav say that they objected before Rebbe, before Yehuda Nasi, just go to the colon, even according to him who says that an object robbed from a Gentile is forbidden, everybody agrees that what is lost is permitted. So that's an ugly part of rabbinic law. What are they talking about? Does anyone understand? Right. Not stolen. If something is stolen in rabbinic literature, there are different laws for your obligation to Jewish people as opposed to non-Jews. So, it's just rabbinic literature. There's all sorts of reasons for that, the societies that they lived in, the pressures that they felt, but it is what it is. So non-Jews, there's a certain, so everybody agrees, Kulei Alma, everybody thinks that if you see your friend who's not Jewish, not your friend, like anyone who's not Jewish, you can't like stolen stuff, like they get their computer stolen from them and then it gets put in the back of the Chevy before you buy it. Everyone agrees you can't keep that. But if they just lost it, under rabbinic literature, you don't have the same. Gary has an obligation to me to try and give these back to me. With non-Jews, it's not the same obligation. It's a little bit like finders keepers. Hold on, Melinda. Go ahead, Melinda. But then I'm going to refute that in just a second. Go ahead. It's presumed by the context, and I don't know much about donkeys, like rearing. I mean, someone's called me an ass before, but that's about as close as I get. I don't know much about donkeys, but the context assumes that it was unknown. It was lost. It was like Gary forgetting the Stam Usual jersey or his computer in the trunk. Oops. And we've all had those big oopses. So it's presumed that it's just lost. Go ahead, Lana.
If you're not obligated, doesn't mean you can't.
Good.
That's part
I'm going to call you Shimon ben Shetach in a second. Wait, hold on. For those at home, Lana said, wait a second. Just because you're not obligated doesn't mean you can't. And I'm going to even take it one first step further. Or doesn't mean that you shouldn't.
Okay, number two, you open up that computer and there's some identification and you know who this person is. And it turns out maybe somebody who's an anti-Semite and returning it could have some repercussions. So if you go back to ancient times, I mean, we're not experienced the ancient times, but the person a Gentile could be perceived differently if they're to be
Correct.
taken harm of.
Right. So are you in fact restoring someone who's an oppressor on you? Are you strengthening their position? That's a good point. Your first point is the way Shimon ben Shetach lays. He says, wait a second. According to the letter of the law, I don't have to. But it doesn't mean I can't. And then he even takes it one step further and says it doesn't mean that I shouldn't. So he says to them, do you think that Shimon ben Shetach was a barbarian? Shimon ben Shetach wanted to hear from the people, praise be the God of the Jews, more than any gain in this world. Basically what that means is he realized, Shimon ben Shetach that is, that you should return it. Because let's say in this situation, Gary, who has the car and he left his computer in the trunk of the car and he sells me the car, and he's not Jewish. In this case, Gary's not Jewish. Gary sees it, I buy the car, I'm wearing a yarmulke. I say to Gary, we got to get the transaction done before Shabbos. I keep kosher. Then Gary calls me up on Sunday morning. He says, I know I sold you the car on Friday afternoon. I forgot a computer in the trunk. Let me swing by your house and get it. And I say, sorry, Gary. You're not a member of the tribe. It's mine. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers. How's Gary feeling about the Jewish people? Bad. In some ways, you could even say it's a chilul Hashem. It's a desecration of God's name. It's like when you open the New York Times and you see like some guy or woman who did something terrible and they have a Jewish name, and you're like oy vey, right? Like the guy who defrauded everybody from the cryptocurrency and Bernie Madoff. I mean, the list goes on, unfortunately. And it's oy vey moments. Like you want to hide when you see that they're Jewish. So Shimon ben Shetach is saying, we want to minimize that. We want Gary to say, those Jews, they're honorable people. I left my computer in the trunk. They opened the trunk and they even called me and said, hey, can we drop off your computer because you left it in the trunk of the car you just sold? That's how we sanctify God's name. The question, and I didn't look this up, is does that almost elevate it to law? I think it does. I think the codes would actually say, because of that reasoning, now you're actually required to return it. even though you're not really required under the law of property, but because of societal, like, okay? This is all a pretext to returning objects and okay, so now I want to go forward. Go to go to page 3. So now there's a similar situation that's going to occur with an unexpected treasure discovered, right? We learned about the case with Shimon ben Shetach with the pearl, and he says, go return it. Now we're going to introduce a situation where Alexander the Great is going to encounter a similar of a found object, okay? Does everyone see where we are? Page 3, 4 lines from the top. Alexander the Macedonian went to the king of Cassia. Now, Cassia, I'm not sure, like, think about that as like once upon a time. This is like the intro. This is how we should read it. Once upon a time in a land far, far away. That's the introduction. So it's mythical. Okay? He saw that he had much gold and much silver. So Alexander the Great comes, and the king at the far end of the earth is loaded. If you're the king and you see Alexander the Great coming, what do you think is going to happen? Yeah, uh-oh. Because Alexander the Great is a conqueror. You got issues, right? So Alexander the Great anticipates this, and he says to the king, I do not need your gold nor your silver. I came only so I could see your practice, how you are dealing, how you are judging. Let's keep that in mind. So Alexander the Great says, no. I'm here for a cultural exchange. I'm not here to rob you of your resources. I want to learn more about you and the ways of your people. Okay, let's see about that. So hold on to that for a second. While he was still discussing with him, the king and Alexander the Great are still having this discussion, there came a man having a dispute with another, for he bought a plot. And like he dug it. This is like a different it's like the translation. It's a note here. It's either a garbage heap, whatever. He bought land and he dug into the land and found, do you see where we are? And he found a treasure trove of dinars. He found a lot of money. So there's two guys. They exchange land. There's a land transaction. One guy then goes to excavate the land, to dig it up, to prepare for building something on it. And behold, he uncovers money. Lots of buried money. Listen to this. The buyer said, I bought a garbage heap. I did not buy a treasure. And the seller said, I sold a garbage heap and all it contains. What's odd about this dispute? It's the opposite. The buyer should be saying, I bought a garbage heap and everything that's in it. And the seller should say, I sold you a garbage heap but not a treasure. But it's reversed. They're fighting against one another by trying to make a better claim for the other. They're arguing the other, what should be in the best interest of the financial interest of the other person. And they're fighting about it. Right. I sold you a car, not a computer. And you sold me a car and everything that's in it. But it would be Gary saying, I sold you the car and everything in it. And I said, no, Gary, you just sold me a car. That's the equivalent. So they flip the roles. So when you read this text, you have to do a double take. Wait a second. What does that tell you about these people? They're virtuous. I mean, my gosh. They're arguing about who gets to be in a worse fiscal position. So they're virtuous. I mean, what a great debate to have. No, I want to do right by you. No, I want to do right by you. That's the fight that they're having. And the fight gets so elevated, it has to go to the king while Alexander the Great is visiting. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, but there's no indication of that. You have a good imagination, but there's no indication. Yeah, no, take them at their word here. While they were still, so look at this then what happens. If you were the king, what would you do? Split it. Okay, Solomonic. The king actually does something very interesting here. Watch this. While they were still arguing with one another, the king asked one of them, by chance, do you have a son? Yeah, well, there's only one kind of son, right? Okay, or maybe they're not anymore. I'm not sure. So I don't know. But there's a male son. Okay. He answered yes. He asked the other one, do you have a female daughter? He answered yes. He told them, the king says to these guys who are fighting, marry them to each other and the treasure should belong to both. It's actually the opposite of Solomon. It's not divide. It's, unite, consolidate. It's join your forces. It's like build a family. And he's not adjudicating based on justice. He's sort of like trying to build for the future. He's like, they got to, marry your son, marry your daughter, and now they can buy a house, in Sherman Oaks. Right, like bringing nice families together again. Like we would want these people to be members of Adat.REL, right? They're two nice families. Bring them together. Let the kids get married, and we already have a down payment, and they can make a nice donation to the annual campaign. Okay, right. So the king, right? I think you're right that it underscores, the text underscores, like they're trying to build a virtuous society. You have people who are making arguments that are not in their fiscal best interest because they think it's right. And then you have a king who's like, I see two righteous people, let's help them come together and build a home together. So you have, you see the seeds, they're like society building, decency. You see all of that happening. Anyone else someone want to say something? I saw a hand. No? Okay. He started to laugh. That's Alexander the Great starts laughing at this whole thing. He, the king, asked him, Alexander the Great, what are you laughing about? Did I not judge correctly? He asked him, if the case came before you, how would have you judged? Oh, Alexander the Great, you who came here on a cultural exchange, hoping to learn the ways of my people. What would have you done? Here's what Alexander the Great says. He told him, Alexander the Great tells the king, one kills both of them and the treasure falls to the king. They would have both come up to me. I would have said off with both of their heads and I'll keep the money. And actually, that's a poke at. I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure if it's Greek society or Roman society, but a lot of ancient societies, it was when estates were ownerless, it defaults to the government. So that's Alexander the Great saying the law of his land, which is, I'm going to make they're fighting like, oh, you could take it. No, you take it. You take it. Great, I'll take it. That's what Alexander the Great just said. And he uses the law as a way of a vehicle. He made him, so Alexander the Great says, I'd kill both of them and keep the money. He told him, the king tells Alexander the Great, do you love gold so much? Like, really? Then the king makes him a meal and brought before him, this is the Midas touch part, golden meat and golden chicken. He asked him, Alexander the Great asked the king, can I eat gold? He told him, the spirit of this person should be wiped out. You cannot eat gold. Why do you love gold so much? So he said, it's a Midas touch thing. He's not suggesting that, he's basically saying your appetite is insatiable for gold and that you'll always want more. He asked him, does the sun shine upon you? He answered, yes. Does the rain fall upon you? He answered, yes. He asked him, do you have small animals? He answered, yes. The spirit of this person should be wiped out. You live only by the merit of the small animals, as it is written, man and animal you are saving, O Eternal. This is a pasuk from the Torah where, basically the king doesn't understand why Alexander the Great, who's such a terrible person, should be still alive. Why isn't divine justice take hold? Because there's a pasuk in the second paragraph of the Shema, the one that we mumble. Continue until the top of page 32. Right? The Hebrew mumble. In that, it says that, you do nicely and your crops get watered. If you don't do nicely, then you get by God. But it also says that there are animals, and so what he's saying is, they're animals. So maybe God, the king is saying, God doesn't exact because of the animals. In other words, the king is confounded. Why would Alexander the Great get to live? He's such a heinous person with this insatiable appetite. And so he's going through she's like, oh, you have a land. Yeah, you have animals. Now I understand. Since your land has animals, God must keep you around, not for your sake, but for the sake of animals. Because that's the only way it makes sense. So the non-Jewish king is doing Talmudic logic to understand why Alexander the Great, who is insatiable with his appetite for gold, why he's still alive. And the story ends. Comments, thoughts, questions? It's right. 1,000 years ago, if there was a real estate opportunity in Saudi Arabia, you would have passed. Right? And now it looks for the House of Saud. That's a pretty good, it worked out pretty well for him. So Ernie, you're asking a good point in rabbinic, and I can't answer without more particulars, but the question is, at what point do unintended consequences that benefit one person that were unrevealed to the other person, like what's the obligation to the beneficiary? And it's a great question. What the text is saying here is there are societies, it's clear what it's saying, like they want us to be more like the kingdom and not like Alexander the Great. This is a polemic against them, saying here the world is being swallowed up by this Greek culture. And Alexander the Great, who was getting a reputation as, oh, like cultural and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, they're like, no, no, no. This is about money. He's taking over the world for money. Let's not kid ourselves. In fact, he's running over societies that have good values and good ethics. And he's going there and he's saying, oh, I come in peace and, you know, I'm here to learn your ways. BS. He's coming there to make it's a land grab. And that woe to us if that wins, is what the rabbis are saying. And it's brought in the context of the other story of Shimon ben Shetach to say, our way is more like this, the way of that kingdom, that we have consideration for other people when Gary leaves the computer in his car, that we have responsibility to another. And I'll tie this up to what I did last night. Like, what I think is so cool is that's the value of the Ten Commandments, is that prior to the recording of the Ten Commandments, no society, no pagan society had made the claim that civil obligations had religious value. And our tradition says, wait a second, me returning to Gary or Gary returning to me, whoever has the car, that has me returning Gary's computer is an act of religiosity. It's religiosity is not confined to the sanctuary, right? And that's a novel. Pagan societies didn't believe that. They thought like priests or they didn't call them rabbis, obviously. You stay in the sanctuary, and we'll have other like laws that will adjudicate. But they didn't think about it in terms of godliness. And the Ten Commandments is the first time where we, I said something last night, it's where never before had a crime been thought of as a sin until the Ten Commandments. And here, it's just the opposite. Like, being ethical in your business is an act of holiness. So Ernie, to answer your question, I don't know we're just, we're schmoozing here. I don't know the answer, but doing that correctly, wherever the line is an act of holiness. And the Greek way would be finders, keepers, losers, weepers, and make them all lose, right? Like take it, might makes right. I mean, that's what it's essentially saying. It's even worse. It's like 3 grades. There's finders, keepers, losers, weepers. At least you get to lose, you get to weep. But there's our way, which is return. Then there's finders, keepers, losers, weepers, which at least the loser gets. And then there's Alexander the Great way, which is kill them all and take what you want. Sure. So Ernie's question was a good one, and let's say you buy a piece of land, and then sometime later, oil is discovered, or gold. So I would say without the particulars of the text, of the situation, and not having, I'm sure there are responses written, that this is a source that you would have to be reckoned with. And my gut is telling me that it would be a proof text in one way, that there would be, that the claimant would use this text in Jewish law to say, wait a second, like, do Zerny have to do something by me? That would for sure be, like, it seems to me that you would have something there.
My parents owned a house in the Fairfax district, and there was slant drilling for oil, and we had the proper. When you buy a house, the government, or the way the escrow works, is that in the contract you get the mineral rights to the house. This prevents people from suing each other, which would be problematic because there's now a dispute over all this money. That doesn't mean you couldn't go back to the person who bought it from and say, hey, I just got $20 a month. That's what it came to. And give some of it back, because that would be the Jewish obligation. But as a matter of the contract and to settle things, it's part of when you buy a house, you get the mineral rights.
Great. So I think this text is just trying to point out that we looked, and I'll bring this discussion just to a close. Thank you. That let me bring the whole semester to a close. I think a lot of the point of these texts is to show that godliness enters the arena in our business dealings, in our intimate relationships. We remember texts like that. In our governmental relationships, in our relationships with our parents. Remember the text with the mother. So that Judaism doesn't see religion as confined to the sanctuary. And that business and intimacy and how you deal with friends, how you deal with neighbors, how you engage the world, how you live life, there's ethics involved and there's demands. We didn't study the halacha, we didn't study the Jewish law around it, but what we did was we studied stories that illuminated ethical ideas for us. A lot of them were sad ideas that we learned by examples of what not to do. But I hope that over the course of this semester that we encountered texts that you found interesting and that you found kind of made you think about life and how you were living it. And that was the goal of this semester, and I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you so much for having it. And yeah, questions on any of the texts that we've learned, because I remember none of them, but but go ahead, yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, but you're absolutely right, and I think that's so. The comment was that it's hard because we're so disappointed when we look around society. Our political leaders fall short, and we're outnumbered. So I'd say double down on religion. I mean, because I'm a rabbi. but like I think more people, I I think voices of morality are important voices, and that's why I think it's important for kids to be here. And I think because we're talking about what makes right and how to be decent people, how to be the type of kid that you want to raise, that when they dig up a field and they come across a bag of gold are thinking about how they are going to do the right thing. And so, it's interesting with politics because people are more fervently political than ever before. Their politics have become almost like there's a religiosity to their politics, which also then ultimately ends up disappointing them. And so, like, for me, it's I wish that more people would engage in religion, because I think good religion, at least, is teaching those. And it doesn't have to just be Judaism. I think there are other good religions out there that are teaching people to do good things and be good people. But I do think that we are, and I'm not suggesting that it's coerced by the government. I mean, if you look at Israel, like it misfires. But I think the proliferation and success of religion, what's his name? Robert Polzin is a sociologist at Harvard University. He has a whole study, essentially, it's like the world is falling apart and we're like becoming more disconnected and less involved, less on everything. And he writes a comma when he wrote another book, essentially, except for institutions of religion, where community bonds are tighter, where people feel a sense of belonging, and people are told right from wrong. Anyway, thank you for that comment. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, I wanted to thank everyone for a great semester at MID, and I also want to let you know that the cafe is going to be reopening in March. So I know it's a few weeks away, but I know they're going to be in touch with MID so that they can think about how to have a relationship with MID. So that's exciting. And I hope that to see everyone at Super Bowl Shabbat, and everyone should be here on Shabbat for Joette's Devar Torah. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi, so much for a wonderful semester, and we will look forward to next year.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. All right. And Gary, no, I'm not going to buy a car from you, and I'm going to remember my earbuds.
So, I was talking to my daughter last week about last week's Talmud. She teaches Talmud at Shalhevet.
Oh, okay.
And so she says, did they cover the fact that this is an experience of the Jewish people? And did they cover the fact that it was Jesus? And I says, yes. So you get kudos.
Oh, good. Good.
Joette could answer that question for me. Yeah. Rabbi, one quick question. What did she lose here? Because I don't read Hebrew. She lost what? It's in Yiddish, Hebrew.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't say that. I fast forwarded.
Yeah, I know you did, but I read it through and I said, well, what did she lose?
The Delian. I think it's like an ornament, like maybe a bracelet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, whatever.
It's a bracelet or
Yeah,
like a
but you know, you teach. When my son was 7 or 8 at the airport, he found a little change purse.
Oh, good.
We try to teach our children. 7 or 8, he finds a change purse. I said, you have to turn it in. And he looks at me. I said, well, we don't know who it belongs to. There's nothing in it. I said, you know what, Michael? When you turn it in, if it's not claimed, it'll come back to you. And he was so angry at me. He turned it in, and 2 months later, he gets a call. Come pick up the, you see? So we raise them, we try. He has nothing to do with Judaism. Yeah,
Where does he live?
in Ventura. He was bar mitzvahed here. My daughter was bar mitzvahed here. Shliva went on for confirmation, and Michael refused. He didn't want to learn the Torah, blah blah blah, and very bright. And I said, well, you have a choice. You have a bar mitzvah, you'll have a party. You don't want a bar mitzvah, you don't have a party. He was bar mitzvah. He was brilliant. He learned. He went to Old Klein and came back speaking Hebrew, and he wanted to join the Israeli army. And I said, no, when you're 18, you'll decide.
dropped out of school. He dropped out of school.
So Tony is finished.
Semi-finalist Merit Award scholarship. He went to the Merman School. Do you know about the Merman School? He went there. He wasn't working enough. And my ex-husband said to him, he's going to get in trouble. He has to join the Navy. He's got to join anything to give him the discipline.
Did he?
Well, we had a sign for him. He wasn't 18 yet. He got out,
So
took
what,
the
you go to
GED.
like Home Depot
And
or
I'm
something?
crying while I'm signing the papers. And my ex said to me, he needs this. There was no war at the time. Everything, it was in 1979. It was the best thing that he ever did. Because in the Navy, he realized there are rules. You have to follow the rules. You have to. Men haven't seen a Jew before. And he, because of his SAT scores, blah, 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 he got scholarships. When he was in the Navy, he made applications, went to college. He was 4 years old. He worked his way through because he was. Make a long story short, he's a judge today. Okay?
That's great.
So go now. Go now.
So I will be here next week, but the 2 weeks after that I won't be here. So, Ray, do you want to arrange a ride? Yes. Somebody else? Yes, we will. We will. I mean, yeah, because, I mean, but she managed this morning on Zoom for whatever, streaming, whatever it is that you have. Okay. For the first hour. No, I will pick you up. Is the room open? No, we're not going here. We have to do it here because I think that's why no, we have to do it here. I'll bring you water.
I just mind my own business and go about it. I don't pay much attention to politics because it's all. You don't have to. No, you want to also striving with people in the body, people in the body, passing their